Okay, hi, I'm Kevin, and this is the first part, the introduction to a series of discussions on how we heal. Okay, and in the process of discussing this question, really, of how is it that we heal, developing a deeper understanding of healthcare, and holistic approaches to health and healing, developing an understanding in ways that make a difference. Okay, that help us to heal, that allow us to take care of ourselves, no matter what our healthcare challenges might be. Okay, so briefly, holistic means whole. And in fact, when you look at the root word of health, health also means whole. Okay, so to consider health, or to consider holistic approaches to health, is to consider and engage with all of who we are, okay, and all of that which affects us. And now, when we think about this, that's a big chunk to get our brain, so to speak, wrapped around. And, it's one of the reasons why I think, at least in my experience, when, many of us are comfortable with the word holistic or holistic health, okay? Many of us have become comfortable with understanding or pointing to the idea of health and healing, body, mind, and spirit, okay? But what I don't think we have is a deeper understanding of the implications that those terms, really, those ideas have for our healing process, okay? Now, in some ways, it's funny that we even have to ask the question, why do we heal? Because on one level, anyway, we can say we already know how to heal, okay? Our bodies know how to heal. Ever since we first fell on a playground, however many years ago that might have been, and, hopefully someone around that loved us was there to pick us up and brush us off and maybe put a Band-Aid on our knee. But, over the course of the next 3 days or so after that instance, we're, intimately connected with our healing process, okay? And that's not to make light of more serious health conditions, obviously not, but to underscore the fact that in each of us, health is extant and innate as we speak. And it doesn't even have to do with regard so much to a healing response to an injury, say, or a disease or illness, but just the normal processes of physiology are engaged in healing all the time. As an example, in our bodies, each of us, we're creating every second on the order of about 2.4 million red blood cells. Okay, so every second, 2.4 million red blood cells are being generated within our bodies. And, at that rate, every 2 minutes, we're creating enough microscopic little red cells that if you laid them end to end to end, they would stretch the length of the entire interstate highway system, to give you a sense of the scale, to give you a sense of the potency and the generativity of health in our physiology. Okay, so health is in us, and it's innate. And I think it's important to say, or to segue from that point into this notion of, at a very fundamental level, you are okay. At a very fundamental level, you can connect with the innate health in your body. You can connect with it, and you can cultivate health, no matter what your healthcare challenges are, okay? And I'm not trying to make a rash statement here, and I want to show you over the course of the discussions why I'm making this statement and how you can embody it, use it, and become empowered in terms of cultivating your own health. And all of this, of course, then to step back for a moment and say, we're not naive. None of us are naive, yeah? Of course we get sick. Our healing response fails, okay? We, generally speaking, can face serious health challenges, right? Our healing response can be slow. It can be not robust, okay? So we're back to the question then, having made the statement that health is in us and it's innate and you are okay fundamentally. True that. And yet, we still need to ask the question, how do we heal? Because we do get sick, okay? So what do we do then when our bodies seem to fail us, okay? Or betray us, okay? And why is it that our healthcare system so often feels as though it's, how to say, insufficient or inadequate in terms of its ability to respond to our health needs, okay? Our healthcare needs. So lots of questions here as a beginning. Let's step back for a moment, and I'm going to suggest that a general definition of disease or sickness can be useful. And to offer this statement, what is sickness or disease? Well, sickness or disease occurs when our systemic resources are overcome by the demands of the environment, okay? When our systemic resources are overcome by environmental demands or stressors, okay, in body, in mind, in spirit. Okay, and the vectors of disease can be external or internal. We could have external forces that affect us, and our healthy operating physiology is not able to withstand those demands. A tree could fall on me, and my systemic resources would not be able to respond to the demands of the environment. A bit of an extreme example. But then, of course, I could be in a situation where my internal physiology is not operating in such a manner as to allow me to negotiate the normal demands of the environment, okay? And I become sick, okay? So there's different ways in which the systemic resources in each of us, different ways in which those systemic resources can be overcome by the demands of the environment. But what's interesting about this is it's a general enough definition of sickness and disease to encompass, okay, conventional Western understandings of biomedical understandings of health and disease. It can encompass alternative traditional wisdom healings, and it can also allow us to be empowered, because then we can ask, when we get sick or disease, we can ask, how do we come into relationship with our innate healing process? Because remember, we said health is innate to us. It is extant and available. No matter where we are, it's always there. Okay, so how do we come into relationship and support our healing process such that our systemic resources are bolstered, okay? How do we resource our system? How do we resource our system in such a way that when we come into relationship with our, with environmental demands or stressors, our system has the ability to mediate or to engage or to move with those environmental demands? Now, we can consider health from a lot of different levels and in a lot of different perspectives. We can look at health from the aspect of our physiology, okay? We can look at health in terms of what are the healthcare systems that are available to us to help us support our healing process, right? To help cultivate our systemic resources, okay? How do our healthcare systems help us to come into relationship with our healing process, right? And we can also look at our belief systems. Where do we turn? What do we tend to use in terms of techniques and procedures and philosophies with regard to health and healing, okay? Broadly, we could say, do we turn to Western conventional empirical scientific biomedical approaches to health and healing? Do we turn to complementary, alternative, traditional, coherent wisdom traditions to understand and support health and healing? Do we have ways to integrate them? Can they be integrated? Okay. Now, these are areas that we can begin to consider the question of health and healing, and each of them present a problem. They present a problem of complexity, frankly. Now, our bodies, when we just consider physiology alone, the complexity in our bodies is staggering and magnificent. there are, depending on who you talk to, anywhere between 10 and 100 trillion cells in our bodies. Okay? In addition to that, we've got 100 trillion cells in what scientists call the microbiome. Okay, the microbiome then is all the bacteria that live in our guts and on our bodies. And these bacteria very much are critical, imperative to the health and well-being of our physiological function. If they weren't there, we would be very sick. So now we've got 100 trillion in relationship with another 100 trillion, and then in each of these cells are the processes of metabolism, okay? The process of metabolism, this is the breaking down of molecules, the building up of molecules from proteins, the sum total of which is really fundamentally life itself, okay? So now we've got 100 trillion times 100 trillion times thousands of intracellular interactions every second, and we've got an order of complexity, okay? Orders of magnitude that are for practical purposes infinitely complex, okay? Which is not to say that we can't engage with them. We need, though, skillful means. We need to know how and why we are using the techniques that we use to engage with this arguably infinite complexity in our physiology. So complexity, right, in our physiology, but that's not even it. We can look at our healthcare systems and also have a conversation around complexity. And in some ways, this complexity is underscored by the level to which many of us, most of us, are dissatisfied and frustrated with our healthcare system. We're disenfranchised even with our healthcare system often, okay? And when I say healthcare system in this country, primarily referring to conventional Western scientific approaches, but the sum total even of Western and complementary approaches, all right? And we can underscore the idea or notion of the complexity of our healthcare system simply by looking at the problems we face. The World Health Organization actually ranks us 38th in the world in our overall health, and yet we spend almost twice as much as the next nearest country in terms of per capita expense on healthcare, right? About $8,000 per person. For that, we are ranked 37th in the world in terms of our life expectancy, okay? We face an obesity epidemic and metabolic syndrome and lifestyle healthcare problems that our healthcare system has not been able to mediate, all right? Our cures fail us in part due to biological complexity that we've already discussed. We have chronic conditions that our Western approach doesn't have answers for or cures for or fixes, okay? And then, of course, there's socioeconomic problems with our healthcare system, inequality, inequity, lack of availability, problems that occur as a result of a for-profit medical system, okay? Now, important to say here very strongly that conventional Western approaches are necessary, okay? Very necessary and potent in terms of supporting our healthcare, but as we'll come to see, not sufficient, not encompassing of the holistic system, okay, of all of who we are. Okay, so complexity in our healthcare system. And then finally, we've got our belief systems. We've alluded to this just previous, but we've got problems or complexity in terms of what in the heck do we believe, okay? You know, do we believe in Western approaches? Do we turn to other complementary or alternative understandings of health and healthcare when our conventional system doesn't seem to have answers, fixes, or cures? And interestingly, belief systems are important because when you think about belief systems, our belief systems determine what is available to us. Our belief systems determine what we pay attention to, and what we pay attention to, it determines what we get, yeah? but also it determines what we miss. So our belief systems are potentially, and often are, quite limiting in terms of our ability to use all of that which is available to us in terms of supporting our health and healing processes. Okay, so complexity in belief systems. Okay, now what's the point here? We're going to go into some of these ideas in greater detail, but for here the point that I'm making is that often the complexity of healing disempowers us. Okay? As individuals, we have tended to become disenfranchised, disconnected, and disempowered from our own healing process. And very much this condition is endemic to our conventional healthcare paradigm. Okay? And we'll look at why this is. So, we're disempowered, and we're disempowered, I think, in large part because we don't fully understand how it is that we heal. We're disempowered because we don't holistically understand how we heal. All right? So, complexity. It's disempowering and disenfranchising to us as individuals. Well, how do we tame the complexity of health and healing? I suggest that we do it like human beings always approach complex problems. We build a map, okay? And hopefully we build a good map. See, fundamentally, I think the problem with health is not about techniques or cures or procedures or whether we use alternative or conventional approaches to support our systemic resources, to support our system to be able to respond to the demands of our environment. Fundamentally, the problem is in how we understand health, okay? How do we understand it in a way that gives us the flexibility to be response able to the demands of the environment and response able in such a way that we can support the systemic resources of the sum total of who we are, okay? Our holistic system. So to engage with health, my point here, to engage with health is to engage with complexity. And we need a map, we need a good map. A map that can help keep us oriented, despite the complexity of health and healthcare, and indeed that can provide direction and a means of making considered and holistic choices. Holistic in the sense that all of the things that can support our healing process are recognized and considered. All right. The holistic healing model is a map or a model. I use both terms interchangeably. They can both orient us and provide direction as we engage with the complexity of healing, the complex territory of healing. Now in chapter 2, we're going to develop some of the nuances of using maps and models and how this pertains to the holistic healing model. But here I want to offer the briefest of introductions. There are 6 distinct regions in this map, but these regions are part of a whole, okay? Which we will see represent the sum total of a person's experience. All that we can know can be positioned in this model, okay? Each region affects the whole and affects and is relative or relates to the other regions. Now, holistic means whole. We've said this. Health, by the way, and we've said this as well, also means whole. Okay, so this map helps us to see and consider the whole of our experience and to engage the whole of our experience in support of our systemic resources and our healing process. Now, as you look at it, 3 of these regions are likely familiar in terms of thinking about health. This is the body, the mind, and the spirit. Body being the physical stuff and matter of us, okay? Its function and structure. Mind then being our consciousness and our sense of self. And then spirit, simply put here for now, as a profound sense of connection or communion with something bigger than ourselves, okay? Be it God or nature or mankind or the great mystery, okay? So, the body, mind, spirit of each of us exists then within a greater environment, okay? We don't live in a vacuum, none of us, obviously. So, there are two fundamental classes of or ways of thinking about environment, both important. Okay, so there's the social environment. This is family and culture, okay, societies. The other class of environment are ecosystems, okay, from local to global. Okay, so the body, mind, spirit in relation to environment then exists against a backdrop of two important fields or ways of understanding or looking at the world. All right, one paradigm is objective. Now, it's objective, it's empirical, analytical, scientific, and when we examine the body and the mind from this paradigm, okay, through this lens, as it were, we have the foundations of the Western biomedical approach to health, okay? The other field or paradigm, it's a subjective way of seeing things and is predicated on an individual's own sense of self, our intuitive sense of knowing and our intuitive relationship with the truth. Okay? So now these two different paradigms can consider the same set of circumstances, frankly, and arrive at very different conclusions of truth. So recognizing and creating a relationship between these two paradigms is fundamental to our understanding, to an effective understanding of health and healing, to a holistic understanding of health and healing. Okay, so a holistic approach to healing requires that we give full recognition and consideration, okay, to our healing process from both paradigms. Very important. We'll get to more of this, of course, later. And it will show us how to behave and act in very real ways in the very real world. All right? So the resolution of the paradox, okay, between these two paradigms is not so much determining which truth might be right or wrong, okay, but rather on the process of considered choice, engaging both paradigms, okay, engaging both paradigms at appropriate times. So, this is a quick introduction to the holistic model. We're going to continue to develop our understanding such that it allows us to fully support and come into relationship with our healing process. Okay, when we ask the question, how do we heal? When we consider the question, can we heal? The answer a proper understanding of the holistic model suggests is yes, always. We can heal, okay? And our quest here is to find out how. The quest for healing is about finding a direct and empowered relationship with our holistic healing process. Okay, so what to take away from all of this, okay? First and importantly, you can always heal. You can heal now, all right? Health is innate. You are fundamentally okay. We do not hear that enough in our system of health and healthcare. Now, oftentimes we're disempowered and disconnected from our own systemic resources. We are disconnected from a relationship with our healing process, okay? And it often happens because of the complexity of health itself, okay? The holistic model we're going to discuss and develop a way of understanding that allows us to interact with and call forth our healing response.